Hello, and welcome to the 26th Annual Vermont Grazing and Livestock Conference. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, to bring special attention to the National Grazing Lands Coalition, Food Animal Concerns Trust, Morrison's Custom Feeds, Rural Vermont, and the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food, and Markets. Please visit all of our sponsors' virtual booths for more information about their work. I'd also like to thank our partners. They help make our work possible throughout the year. The National Institute of Food and Agriculture, United States Department of Agriculture, Cedar Tree Foundation, and the Forrest C. and Francis H. Latner Foundation. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about how to use Whova to improve your conference experience. During the sessions, we will take Q&A from the audience. You will submit your Q&A questions under the Q&A tab to the right of the session recording. If you blow the session recording up to full screen, you will lose the tabs to your right. So just remember that you'll have to minimize them, the screen, when you have a question in order to put your question in the Q&A tab. You can also see other attendees' questions. This allows the upvoting of questions to increase the likelihood that they will get asked and answered. There is a chat tab here. This is for you and other attendees to share your wisdom. We will also use it to post resources from the presentations. And you will also find the live captioning link here in the chat tab. For the live captioning of each session, you will cut and paste that link into a new browser window. Please use Google Chrome as your browser. There's also a polls tab and a community board tab. The polls tab will help you provide feedback to the presenters. And the community board will allow you to connect with other attendees. There are a number of networking features within Whova that helps you connect to other attendees. One new feature is the speed networking sessions. We will be hosting one speed networking session on the 22nd from 11:30 to 12:30. This is an opportunity for farmers to sit together and chat at a virtual table. Every 10 minutes, you will be shuffled to a new virtual table, but you'll have a chance to introduce yourself and say hello to new and old friends. You can also email, text, or video call other attendees. You can do this for the next 6 months. For the next 6 months, you can host a virtual meetup or create a discussion group on topics of your choice. Again, please use Google Chrome as your browser, and you have this capability for the next 6 months. Did I mention that you can host a virtual meetup or start a topic discussion group? So this is under your community tab on the left. And there are a number of features where you can start to network with people who have similar questions to your questions. Thank you for participating and spending the time with us for the 26th Annual Vermont Grazing and Livestock Conference. I hope you enjoy the content.
Welcome, everybody. This is Jen Colby. I am the former Pasture Program Coordinator and Conference Coordinator, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to our final session today with Dr. Fred Provenza. Sarah Flack and I have been hoping to get Fred for well over a decade to come speak at our conference, and we're just so pleased that we were able to have you come. So I want to encourage everyone to put in questions. Fred's going to start with a little bit of an overview and talk for the first portion, and then we're going to do a little Q&A in the second half of our afternoon here. So please write what you'd like in the Q&A and be sure to upvote questions as you hope that they get asked. The questions with the higher votes tend to be more likely to be asked. There we go. So I'm going to turn it over to Fred to share a screen. And thanks, Fred. Oh, and a little bit of background. Dr. Fred Provenza is emeritus at the University of or Utah State, I should say, and was founder of the Behave Unit and Program, which is known internationally for animal behavior, landscapes, beyond. Fred will talk a little bit more about this work. Thanks, Fred.
Okay, Jen, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here with you, and want to thank Megan too for all the work that she's been doing, and all the folks that are going to join us today. I'm really looking forward to this. And what Jen and Megan and I decided was that maybe the best way to do this is to give a brief overview, maybe 15 minutes or so, 20 at the most, hopefully, of just trying to link things together, this whole idea of conception to consumption and how palates link animals with foodscapes, and then open it up for question, answer, discussion, comments, anything that folks want to add. For those who have followed our work over the years, you know that this whole notion of nutritional wisdom of the body has been a really important part of the program and trying to understand how that works. And when I think back on it, there are really three legs to that stool. One is what I refer to as flavor feedback kind of relationships. And I mention that first because I'm not going to say much about that. It'll be in the background. But that was such a fundamental part of the work we did. And what it is that these cells and organ systems of the body, including the microbiome, the gut microbiome, have a say in changing our liking for food and the liking of animals. So feedback from these primary and secondary compounds mediated by cells and organ systems changes liking for food as a function of need. So it's really the foundation of nutritional wisdom. But that only works if animals have a variety of different forages to select from. And I want to talk about variety and forage diversity and how that influences the health of livestock and wild animals, as well as human beings. And the other link that I want to say a little bit about is the whole social cultural part of things. That became such an important part of our work. And so I'll say a bit about that too, as another one of those links. So start with this transgenerational linkages. And I spent 7 years working on a ranch in Colorado back probably about 50 years ago now. And it really got me thinking about what does it mean for creatures to know the range, to be locally evolving with the landscapes they're on. And that took us down this path of mother as a transgenerational link. Mother really links ancestors with offspring and the landscapes that they inhabit. And I think she plays such a fundamentally important role. When a person looks more generally in the scientific literature, can find evidence for everything from insects to birds to mammals that natal experiences influence food and habitat preferences in this wide variety of creatures. So it's important. It becomes the home field advantage. We talk about it in sports. It's the home field advantage in life, knowing what and what not to eat, where and where not to go, what's a predator, what's not a predator, and on and on and on. It's just pretty fascinating to think about those linkages. And so when we started our work many years ago, it wasn't hard for us to show. It wasn't that we were smart or anything. It's just that these things are so important. So when we did studies to say, does what mom's eating influence a fetus? Do in utero experiences of offspring influence their preferences for foods, their ability to utilize those foods? Why we found it did. Mother's milk also is important as cue to what mother's eating. So Flavors get into the amniotic fluid, flavors of foods that mom's eating get into her milk, and those become cues for what's food. And then after birth, mother is a model, as I was saying, for what and what not to eat, where and where not to go. We did many, many studies that illustrated the importance of that. What we were also realizing is that those experiences change form, function, as well as behavior. So, the development of organ systems, whether it's the central nervous system or the rumen or the liver or the kidneys, all those are influenced by experiences early in life. The form, how they develop, then the function of those physiologically, how those organ systems function is also changing. And that then goes along with changes in behavior. And so, when we're finding that animals that have experience in utero have a better ability to digest forages that mother's been eating, all that's being manifest as changes in form, function, and behavior. And so this whole field of epigenetics that's really come into the forefront in the last 10, 15 years or so is a part of that. And I bring that up for several reasons. So these experiences are influencing gene expression, and then that gene expression can go from mother to offspring to the offspring's offspring. It's a way to, without changing the genome of the animal, to allow genes to be expressed that change form and function, and then behavior. And that's in all facets of life. And I put this slide in to set up the next slide. But the point here is studies that people were doing with rats early on in this epigenetic saga. They were showing that nurturing by mother, how much a mother rat licks and nurtures her pups, influences the development of those rat pups. Nurturing early in life increases calmness and reduces stress-related diseases in the adults. And so there's this whole facet to it. And I brought that up because I have a friend in New Zealand who's doing amazing work, Pablo Gregorini and his students, just doing vast amount of really interesting work. But one of the things they were doing, and it relates to where I'm going next on diversity of plants in the diet, is they're showing that ewes raised on pastures with a diverse mixture of phytochemically rich plants compared to ewes that are raised on a monoculture food, they have lambs with lower levels of cortisol in their fleece at birth. That is to say that mother is experiencing more stress when she doesn't have a choice of foods under the conditions they ran their studies, and that's translating right down into the offspring. And we can think about any of the things I'll talk about with those kind of linkages in mind. So let's talk then about plant diversity and herbivore health. And could start by saying that plants transform dirt into soil, and diverse mixtures of plants transform soil into homes, grocery stores, and pharmacies for creatures below ground and above ground. To me, that pretty well sums up so much kind of information about linkages and the importance then of diversity in creating habitat, in creating places where animals can nourish themselves and also self-medicate themselves. And I think, nothing's more important for health through nutrition than landscapes that have this diverse array of different plant species. My wife and I are living in Innis, Montana nowadays, and there's a range called the Gravelly Range and has just incredible mixtures of plants. And I think about the animals, the cattle that are up on those landscapes, and just thinking about how healthy they look and how healthy they are. And as we'll get to as we go along, how incredibly health promoting, no doubt, their meat is for human consumption. Early in my career, I spent a lot of time, and when I was on the ranch, very interested in food selection by animals. And when I got involved in studies of that, we would find that 3 to 5 plants make up the bulk of the diet for an animal in any one meal, whether it's a sheep or a cow or a goat. But they'll often nibble on 50 to 75 other plants during the day. And we always emphasized the 3 to 5 plants because we were thinking, that's what's making up the bulk of the food that's going to cause animals to grow and be productive. And that's certainly all true. But what we weren't thinking about is how this 50 to 75 others is contributing to phytochemical complexity that is enabling the health of these animals, all this diverse arrays of these compounds that are under broad classes like phenolics and terpenes and alkaloids and so forth, in small amounts have very important health promoting kind of influences through their many properties: anti-microbial, anti-parasitic, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, immune boosting. These phytochemicals bolster health and protect animals against diseases and pathogens, so that we're coming to appreciate how important they are in the health of livestock and in our health as well. So I often make the point, there's two ways to self-medicate. We did a lot of research on this. We showed that animals, if they're sick, they can learn to select foods and plants that help them therapeutically. But what I was saying just before this diverse array of plants is also protecting them preventatively or prophylactically. So really important, I think, to realize that. And so people are showing, I mentioned Pablo Gregorini in New Zealand, just doing amazingly interesting kind of studies comparing, for instance, ryegrass monocultures, which are common there, with diverse mixtures of species that may contain 6 different species, and just showing incredible differences in terms of the health and welfare of the animals, and then the quality of meat and dairy products for human consumption. Juan Villalba at Utah State's doing similar kind of work. And so they're showing health improves when livestock graze diverse mixtures of plants compared with monocultures. Not only do they gain weight more efficiently, less stress, as we were talking about, but there are also implications for greenhouse gases, less emissions of methane and nitrous oxide. And they're showing that they can reach slaughter weight nearly as quickly as animals in feedlots. So really, really interesting work. And I won't get into all the chemistry of that, but these different plants have different chemical characteristics that complement one another and can really influence health, nutrition, growth, and so forth. There's another point to diversity that I think I sure made a point of, because it became so obvious during our work over the years looking at individuals, and that's that no two individuals are alike in their needs for nutrients or medicines. I don't think it's possible to overstate the importance of that. And so choice and ability to choose enables individuality. And it enables individuals to more efficiently meet their needs for nutrients, which can mean less cost, actually, as we showed in some of our studies with sheep and cattle. And it enables them to self-medicate then as well. So this importance of individuality and choice is really critical. One of the studies we did with cattle, we fed them either a total mixed ration of corn, barley, alfalfa, and corn silage, or we simply allowed them to have a choice. And we showed that animals given a choice ate less food, not more, than the animals on the total mixed ration. They gained weight at the same rate, and it cost less to feed them because they were eating less food. So one example then of the importance of that. When it comes to feedlots, and I realize feedlots have enabled many, many people to be able to utilize meat. So I'm not trying to be the big critic, but this individuality is important. There is no average animal. High grain diets cause food aversions, as we showed in some of our studies. They can make animals feel nauseated. Monotony is stressful for animals. Then you get into these high grain rations. I'll say just a few more words. Animals start to exhibit what we would call in humans metabolic syndrome. And then, we end up using a lot of antibiotics to try to deal with all these issues, which contributes to antibiotic resistance. We did a lot of work with bison back in the day with Ted Turner and some of his managers. And we found that when bison were offered a choice as opposed to total mixed ration, and when they were put in loose confinement as opposed to tight confinement, that they did much better given a choice in loose confinement. But also we had bison that were just allowed to finish on rangelands, finish with their family groups in essence. And what we found was that living in family groups reduced stress, and it was actually the most profitable way to finish bison. Simply to leave them on rangelands. There's a graph there that shows tight confinement. This is cortisol levels, highest levels of stress, loose confinement, less stress. out foraging on rangelands, the least amount of stress. And I mention that because I'm going to close on this idea of plant diversity and human health and give an example with bison. So the idea here then is that resource availability in the environment, sunlight, nutrients, water, the soils that make up the environment, influences the plant species that are able to grow in an environment, which influences plant diversity and chemistry. And that plant diversity and chemistry then influences the biochemical richness of the diets of animals, and that influences the quality of milk, cheese, and meat. There's been some really interesting studies done with dairy cows that illustrate this so nicely. And I'm thinking of one, and I have that here, for cows that were in Italy. And when they compared the phytochemical and biochemical richness of cheese from those animals that were eating a diverse array of different plant species with animals that were fed a total mixed ration, they found the flavor and the biochemical richness of milk and cheese were greatly enhanced for the group feeding on a diverse array of species. And they also found then, not surprisingly, that richness of flavors translated into really strong preferences of the local peoples for meat, milk, and cheese that came from animals grazing on botanically diverse swards. That same kind of idea relates to meat. And I use this as an example here. Warren Angus Ferris wrote a diary, Life in the Rocky Mountains, back from 1830 to 1835. And he, in part of that diet, it's fascinating to read just what he saw and experienced, but he got talking about bison. He says, bison in poor flesh were the worst diet imaginable. But as they became fat, quote, we grew strong and hardy, and now not one of us but is ready to insist that no other kind of meat can compare with that of a female bison in good condition. So is what he's talking about is they come out of winter and they start eating a diverse array of these plants that are on those landscapes. It's really changing the characteristics of the meat. He says with it, we require no seasoning at all. The seasoning, of course, is coming from all the phytochemicals that are in the diet and getting into the meat and fat. We boil, roast, or fry it as we please and live upon it solely without bread or vegetables of any kind. And this is what's amazing, he says, and what seems most singular, we never tire of or disrelish it, which would be the case with almost any other meat after living upon it exclusively for a few days. If you think of yourself trying to live on just one food day after day after day, it's hard for us to imagine being able to do that. But that's what he's saying they were able to do on this bison meat from these animals that were in great condition, eating these really phytochemically rich diets. So that brings me to research that we're doing, and I'm happy to share papers with you on any of this. Stefan von Vliet, formerly at Duke, he's now moved to Utah State University in Logan, has played a key role, lead role in all of this. Scott Kronberg with the USDA ARS and in Mandan is also on it. I'm a cheerleader trying to help out with proposals, writing papers, and so forth. But what we're doing is comparing meat from animals in feedlots with meat from animals eating phytochemically rich diets. And that work's being done with sheep, with cattle, here in the United States, with bison, with chickens, working with Pablo Gregorini, who's working with sheep and cattle and red deer over in New Zealand. So there's quite a lot of data that are being generated. We're doing three kinds of studies. One is metabolomic analyses, and that's simply a contemporary technique that really allows you to look at total phytochemical and biochemical richness. You know, there can be up to 45,000 compounds in meat and fat. And our traditional lab analyses allow you to look at one compound at a time. For instance, omega-3, omega-6 ratios and so forth. And you can do several analyses, but metabolomics allows you to really take a broad look at these kind of compounds. So we're doing that kind of work. And then we're going to combine that with feeding trials with human beings. And we're particularly interested in inflammation after people eat a meal. What happens in terms of inflammatory responses in the body? So I want to say just a little bit more about those two. I won't talk about clinical trials. That's the third stage that we want to move into. that really relates a lot to what Warren Angus Ferris was talking about on being satisfied, satiated after eating a meal, inflammation, longer term health kind of implications related to the different kind of diets that people are on and meat in the diet. So the work that we're doing with bison, we're comparing bison that are finished on rangelands. This is work being done with on one of Ted Turner's ranches. So it's the same bison. They're either allowed to finish on rangelands or they're put into quote feedlots. But it's not that we're going to do this down the road, but the trial that I'm talking about here, they actually had choice. It was loose confinement and some choice. They had alfalfa hay, they had meadow grass, and they had some corn, whole corn available to them. And then they had some minerals. So the differences that we saw, which were great, weren't as great as they would be if these bison had been on a total mixed, high grain total mixed ration. But what we're finding in bison on rangelands is higher antioxidant status, greater anti-inflammatories in their diet, less oxidative stress. And what's really an interesting thing is that the metabolic health of the bison is challenged when they're being fed these grain diets in confinement. They're showing early signs of metabolic syndrome and what we would refer to as metabolic syndrome and diabetes, and probably as a result of two things. One is the diet, but two is the lack of exercise. We're really putting them in a not good position. So I mentioned antioxidants, anti-inflammatory kinds of responses, oxidative stress. The reason we're so interested in that is that low-grade inflammation leads to a variety of diseases. That seems to be something that most people in the nutritional and medical establishments agree on nowadays. And what happens is that notably inflammation occurs within a meal. So anytime we eat a meal, there's an inflammatory response in our body. The kinds of foods we eat influence the degree to which that occurs. And if we're eating inflammatory kinds of foods, meal in, meal out, day in, day out, that's going to really increase the likelihood of a variety of these of diseases. Moderating inflammation by eating wholesome diets can prevent or treat metabolic disease. And when I mention the trials with human beings, what we're particularly interested in is trials like this. And so researchers in Australia compared cattle in feedlots with kangaroos foraging on rangelands in Australia. They fed meat from either cattle or kangaroos to people, and then they looked at what they refer to as postprandial. That simply means after a meal, what was the inflammatory response? And it was amazing to see how rapidly inflammatory markers they were measuring rose after a meal of eating feedlot meat that came from cattle in feedlot compared to kangaroos. There was hardly any rise in inflammatory markers with the kangaroo. And so that's the only study, though, that's ever been done along those lines related to meat. It's amazing to me as a kind of non-human nutritionist that there wouldn't be more interest. And I wrote to the people in Australia, the researchers, and said, you know, obviously, to use researcher jargon, animal and diet are confounded here. Are you going to run this trial with cattle, for instance, that are in feedlots and cattle that are out on rangelands? And they said, no. Our point is simply that if you want to eat meat that's better for you in Australia, eat kangaroo, which is available in their market. So we're very interested in doing that kind of work. It's where we're going next to build on the metabolomic analyses we're doing. So I'll conclude with just last thoughts here and then open it up. What we've been trying to talk about, and Jen and I schemed on this, is trying to really emphasize linkages, that all these things are that we're linked, as we've been trying to say. And then there's two spiritual dangers in severing our links with landscapes, if you think about it, from the hunter-gatherer days, that back in the day, all of our ancestors did that. Wherever we come from on the globe, we were hunters and gatherers, and then to farmers and ranchers who still have really pretty intimate connections with landscapes, to then people who live in cities who don't tend to have much linkages. I think so. One spiritual danger is thinking food comes from the grocery and medicine comes from the pharmacy. The other is failing to recall that we really fundamentally are the earth and the earth is us. To avoid the first danger, I think any of us, even any of us can plant vegetable, herbal, and medicinal gardens. We don't have to be farmers and ranchers to do that. Rear animals we eat, that may be a little harder for people, but you know, from bees to chickens to goat or a sheep, preferably where there's no grocer or pharmacist to confuse the issue. To avoid the second danger, you know, and I realize people are busy nowadays and so forth, but you know, preparing home cooked meals from plants and animals we raise and spending time in nature, just that alone, maybe hunting and gathering, if a person's into that, that gets you linked back, growing, hunting, gathering, and eating plants and animals. I think when you do that, you can experience that sort of at oneness and transformation. If you ponder that as you eat, the energy and matter in someone, and you know, I didn't take the time, but plants and animals are conscious and sentient, all of them. There's amazing literature that's developed around that. As I eat someone, this entity I call, quote, me, which will in the flicker of a cosmic eye return to earth as plants and animals. I often think and get in the experience of that and working with that. And in pondering this mystery, we can come to realize all life is sacred. So it's, you know, I understand where people don't want to eat animals for a variety of reasons, but realizing that plants are conscious and sentient too. And so all life is sacred. Contemplating our interdependence with life on earth, we may come to realize that we are being manifest, the absolute from which all things come, back into which they go. So we're members of nature's communities. What we do to them, we do to ourselves. Only by nourishing them can we nourish ourselves. And I know I often think this sounds so naive, but I think we do that by declaring love, not war, on one another and the landscapes we inhabit. And so with that, Jen, I'll be quiet. I don't know how long I went, but okay, I'll turn it over to however we want to go. You know, I went a little longer than I thought.
No, thank you so much for setting the stage the way that you did, Fred. I think it's wonderful. It's a wonderful backdrop. And I hope that folks have had the chance to also watch Fred's webinars that he did last year through FACT, Food Animal Concerns Trust. Those are also under this session. There's a link to them. If you haven't watched them yet, it'll give you a little bit more background of, you know, a deeper dive into what Fred just tried to give us an overview of. I just also want to encourage folks, if you have questions, to throw them into the Q&A in your Whova chat, or not the chat, but the Q&A side. And we'll start to ask some of those questions in a few minutes. But I have a couple of questions, Fred, if that's okay, just to start.
Yes, absolutely. Fire away. I don't know. I don't know if I have any answers, but you can fire away.
None of us have answers. We just have lots and lots of questions. So have we, do you think we've done ourselves a disservice by, okay, so let me lay the groundwork for this question. So when you describe the, you know, we're eating 3 to 5, I should say, maybe we too, maybe humans too, but livestock are eating, you know, 3 to 5, 3 to 5 plants as the bulk of their diet. And there's a much wider array of things that they choose to eat as well. And if you, so there's the first part of that, but then the second part of that is us as researchers and humans looking at this. We've looked at things like protein, we've looked at things like fat. We've not been looking at micronutrients. There's not a lot of research around those things. So the overall question that I have for you is, have we just done ourselves a disservice because we're looking at the macro level of these things and not looking at the accumulated amount of micro impacts that are out there?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Jen. And I would say that you only progress a little bit at a time all the way along, right? We do that, and I'm thinking back to when plant researchers, biochemists and physiologists started studying plants, and they were focused on soluble carbohydrates, energy for the plant, and protein and minerals, and all these phytochemicals or secondary compounds, they just thought were waste products of plant metabolism, and you can kind of see, well, that's the feces that the plant's getting. And then they came to realize, 50 years ago or so, well, these are secondary compounds, and now we've come to appreciate they're as important as any of the other compounds. They mediate every role in the environment. So I think it's a process as we go along, but I do think, and I'm an outsider to human nutrition research. Honestly, I've tried to read and get my hands a little bit around that, but I didn't do that for a career. But I think the single nutrient focus really takes us down a not good path, because we just become so myopically focused. I love the example with vitamin C, where they kept purifying, extracting, and then looking at its ability to cure scurvy. And they finally got to pure vitamin C, and it wouldn't cure scurvy anymore because there's cofactors that are helping, it's not one thing. And so I think that's where we've really gotten off track. And it becomes so complex. I mentioned that, and this may sound like that was a misstatement, 45,000 compounds in meat and fat. It's mind-boggling to think that, and then to think that your body knows what to do with all of that. So it's kind of like that cartoon, and then a miracle happens, because you can't study that level of complexity, right? You can't, there's no way. And so I think of all the research we were doing with different compounds, obviously, and seeing whether they had an influence. But you finally do make a leap to where, it's the integration of all of those things, and your body knows what to do with that. And so trying to think, it's so easy to, well, you need to get your vitamin C, which is true, right? But so my wife will get after me. Why don't you eat bananas? She loves bananas. I like them some too. How are you going to get your potassium? And then sometimes I'll be craving a banana, and she's, oh, you must be needing, and she teases me, obviously, because she knows this. Oh, you must be needing potassium. Well, there's a jillion things in bananas, right? I don't know. And lately I have been craving meat so much. And I just figure, there's a lot of things in meat, and including the essential amino acids, my body's telling me that it's wanting that. And so, yeah, that's a little long-winded, but it's a good question, and something I think about a lot. And so it's to sum up, to give credit to people as we go one step at a time. But I think now to move away from the single nutrient focus, that's not to say we don't need that, but to realize it's the gestalt of it all, this tremendous amount that are compounds interacting with one another, interacting with cells and organ systems. And and then to come to appreciate that, which you don't read much about, that there is actually a wisdom of the body that knows. And if you can expose a body to wholesome foods, and then let your body sort it out, just trust in the wisdom of your own body. That's what we did for eons before we got nutritionists and biochemists and so forth. And again, it's not to criticize that at all. I appreciate very much the expertise and what that's helped us to know. But moving away from the single food code, I think that's where finally summing up on your question, where that led us, is that
I'm glad we've gotten there, at least, to some degree. I mean, we have to take those steps along the way, don't we? Yeah.
Yes, and we realize more and more how complex it is. I love Einstein's equation: ego equals 1 over knowledge.
That's true.
Isn't that true? When we don't, and I was saying, for me, when you don't know much about it, you're really bold in terms of the comments you make and the things you do. The more you learn about everything, you start to realize it better not even open your mouth about anything anymore, because it's a humbling thing, in a very good sense.
Well, it totally is. And so I will open my last question. I've got some good questions coming in the chat for you as well. But my last question for me that I wonder about, and you mentioned it in Ferris's book, you know, that the need to only eat meat, or the ability to only eat meat, or sort of the opposite of that. And I recognize that we evolve where we are and what we're eating. And so, I mean, there's those physiological changes that happen with what you eat, but then there's also the genetic predisposition from where you came from. And then there's also what's available locally. So as a human, how do you make those sorts of choices when, you know, you might be a human who is a Northeasterner who grew up with, you know, meat and dairy, but now lives in the, you know, the islands. Like, how do you, yeah. I mean, how do you reconcile all of that together?
I love the question. And I'm writing a thing now where I was talking about, so what is, you know, yeah, that's exactly right. Someone that comes from the Mediterranean region with a or India with a Hindu religious beliefs, and marry somebody from Argentina with the whole other, you know, and then they're here in the United States. What do they? Yeah, and that's where I think, you know, exposing, and that it's amazing how complicated it's all gotten, isn't it? I mean, you can understand why we almost need nutritionists to guide us anymore, but somehow trying to feed, I think that the point that gets made so often of wholesome foods, wholesome plant and animal foods, if you can grow them yourself or whatever, but just wholesome foods, and exposing your body to a variety of those, and then letting your body tell you is a way to integrate all of that, right, from wherever you come from, because you have, just as you pointed out so well, you have your history, kind of longer term genetic history that's coming down from wherever. Then you've got from in the womb, all these epigenetic kind of, you know, what was your mom eating, what's getting expressed, and then after birth, what's being expressed. And then you have chance playing a role in all of that at the molecular level, to the extent that no two individuals will ever be alike on this planet. So then I think it gets down to trying to expose your body to wholesome foods. I just think that's so critical. And then just trusting in the wisdom of your own body, that this is what my body, you know, if you think, I think my wife Sue and I, we sit down to eat and we don't think about any of this. I guess you've worked it out after 50 years of being together, but you know, so there's a bunch of things that are on the table. We don't select the same things from that. We'll eat, you know, some will overlap, but there's some things I love and I just make sure they're on the table, you know, olive kind of mixes and different kind of things that she won't touch them, you know, so we've kind of figured out, and then we vary it from meal to meal to meal. Well, we have 2 meals a day, but we vary it. And so it's not something we sit and talk about and, well, okay, we better do, but we've worked it out. And so you'd say, well, we ate the same meal for breakfast, and well, we were exposed to the same variety of foods, but we didn't eat the same meal, you know? So I guess that's, yeah, and that just trusting in your body. And it's striking me a lot right now. I mentioned the last couple of meals, 2 or 3, they had birthdays yesterday, Sue and Stan, our son, did their, and I spent all day with the smoker cooking a brisket, and it was delicious. And I just could not get enough of that meat. And it's just, I am really, and the night before chili, and the meat was just so it's, you know, whatever and we could go into all the details of what's in meat, but you know, what I know is my body is wanting meat right now. It tastes so good, and I'm surprised at how much I was eating, actually, you know, not that I'm that great a cook. It's just that yeah. So that coming coming to trust in the wisdom of your own body. And there's so many ways and so many books have been written about how that gets hijacked, right? I think that I often think that a lot, and that could really take us off topic, but both from the physical and the spiritual standpoint, coming to trust in the wisdom of your own body, I think really is an important thing. Your experience, your personal experience, which can be overridden then by the culture, right? I mean, if you read so much about placebo and nocebo effects, and the power of what you're told. I'm thinking, and this isn't a criticism again, but I'm thinking of studies that are done that show that people who are on plant-only diets will often, when they're doing neural scans, you can see that there's a craving for meat. But that's being overridden by different beliefs. And again, I'm not being the critic or anything, but it's just to say, how hard it can be maybe for us to be in touch with the wisdom of our own body when we're bombarded constantly with you should be doing this, you should be doing that, you should be doing, because of the work we've done. I can't tell you how many different email things I get on related to health and nutrition and stuff. If you read every one, it's overload. And so trying to just trust in the wisdom of your own body, I think there's another long-winded answer to your but it's a good question, and that's funny because I'm just writing about that now, about, what is a person to do if they come from all those backgrounds, like you say, and how do you get in touch with the wisdom of your own body?
Well, a takeaway I have from your answer is in our household, whichever of us cooks tends to plate dinner for everybody, and we eat the plated dinner. So I'm feeling like maybe we should do a little bit more family style so that people can pick and choose more of what they eat for what's right for their bodies.
Yeah, well, that choice, and that choice can be within a meal and from meal to meal, and when I mentioned any one meal, 3 to 5 foods or plants will be the bulk of the diet. That's certainly what we were seeing, but that 3 to 5 will vary by each individual too, of course. And we just averaged all that stuff and said, but if you look at the individuals, they're doing different things. And so I often think of those shepherds in France that move those animals different grazing circuits and different meal courses within the day, and they're really enabling those individuals to dine on a variety of things as they go through the day. And when you follow each individual, you realize, oh my gosh, and that gets overwhelming too from a study standpoint. So you realize there is no average individual, and they're all doing their own thing because they have choice and ability to choose.
Totally. So we've been getting some great questions in around diversity of diet and dietary choices. And one of the questions is there work in this for monogastrics? Has there been work done, for pork, for poultry, and what that does for flavor, what that does, for health, animal health? Has it all been ruminant work?
Yes, boy, I think that's a fabulous question related to pork. I think of some of the and I'm not recalling the name. The folks may know, but some of the pork that's produced in Spain, where they finish them on acorns and diets of acorns, and there's a special name for, and I never had the opportunity, but I know friends who have gone there and said this is the most fabulous flavor. You just can't imagine it. So I know there's a personal experience. I haven't gotten much into that literature. I need to search and see what is known on pork. It would certainly influence. It's going to, the diets I eat influence that. And I'll tell you something comes to mind. My mother was a wonderful cook, and she loved to make dinners for everybody. And I remember one time all the family was there, and it was after we were married, so some of the spouses were there, and she'd cooked just a beautiful meal. And pork chops were the main part of it. We started to eat those pork chops and it tasted like a fish. Everyone tasted like fish. And we couldn't eat it. You know, pork is not supposed to taste like a fish, right? And you just knew, well, they fed them fish. Fish meal had to be a part of that diet, and it just totally influenced the flavor of that pork. And so one can think about that. I think too about birds that I used to love to hunt grouse. And early in the fall, when they were eating a variety of different foods and fruits from those different foods, their meat had one really rich flavor. Late in the fall, when they got into the conifer trees and started to eat the needles from Douglas fir, they took on a totally different flavor, just a little hint of terpene. And it actually, I could have seen that as being something really that could make a nice kind of terroir, or whatever you want, because it wasn't overpowering, but you just knew, well, that's the pine needles in the diet. So I'm guessing that for pork, it's going to be the same thing, and maybe even, you know, ruminants, you've got the rumen in there that's influencing a bunch of what happens with the monogastric. It's probably going more right to it. And I think it's fabulous. And that is one thing, unless Stefan's taken that on, he's got so much work, it's unbelievable, so much interest in that topic. But I'll have to ask him about pork if anybody's got him going. And from a personal standpoint, I'll do some looking on that and see what's known about that. It's a great question. It's a great question.
Well, we had a related question around 100% grass-fed dairy, and you know, what are some of the phytochemicals to keep in, you know, what are some of the compounds to keep in mind that affect flavor, that affect palatability?
Yeah,
I recognize palatability has its own thing, but we'll just say flavor for now.
Yes. No, that's a great question, a great point. And what's amazing and so neat about dairy is you don't have to wait, right? You know, immediately, you get immediate kind of feedback on what's there. And I will say, compared with meat, much more research has been done on dairy. And in these reviews I mentioned, we talk about some of the research that's been done that simply talks about the compounds that end up in milk and in cheese and the flavors they have. It makes me think too, we were in Ireland, Sue and I and some old friends of ours a few years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And we were getting ready to tour this little town. And the guide, he was an old fellow, was just telling stories. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. He wouldn't have known I'd be fascinated by this topic. But he started talking about this old lady, this wealthy old lady that had dairy. And she had big place there. And he made this point. He said, whenever she had guests that she really wanted to impress, she knew which pasture to put those dairy cows on, because that produced the greatest, the most robust, wonderful flavors in the milk and the cheese. And so I thought, you know, there it is. That's just what we've been reading these papers about, and people have been trying to quantify in terms of all these different compounds. But, you know, she didn't need any science to know that this is the pasture where I'm going to get the best flavors in the milk and cheese. So, yeah, so I'll pass on those papers to you and Megan, Jen, and the review papers that we've written. But compared with meat, there's much more work that's been done with dairy. We can say that, and looking at the metabolomics and all the compounds that are in that, and then, you know, and linking that, and that's what we want to do is, of course, link the metabolomics work with the diversity of plants that are in the diet, and then knowing something about what is the chemistry of those plants and so forth. I'll also make another point, you know, so on rangelands where we work, there can be, you know, hundreds of plants literally that animals can choose from. And so it may make it sound like, well, you know, you've got to have a jillion of these plants, but some of the work that Pablo's doing, you know, if you have 4 to 6 plants, it can be huge in terms of what happens with the health of the animals and with the health of the the, I guess I shouldn't say health at this point, but with the phytochemical and biochemical characteristics of the meat, it can make a huge difference. So it's not like a person has to have, 100, I got to have 100 species out here. I think too, and I'm going to kind of, there was a fellow named Jerry Bernetti. Did you know of Jerry? Yeah, he was a wonderful fellow, actually, did so much interesting work. But he contacted me many, many, many years ago when we were doing all this work on phytochemistry and finding that out. And he was asking, he said, well, all these plants that we see as, quote, weeds that invade our monoculture pastures, he said, they're not bad, are they? I said, no, they're probably really contributing hugely to all these things that we're talking about. And he wrote a really nice paper about all of those, I think maybe for Acres USA or something. And he was just making those points in a really good way related to dairy and beef and so forth. And now, of course, we're coming to really, really look more specifically at that, going back to your very first question, by increments, we kind of come around to all these
We get
things.
there eventually.
Yeah, and kind of come to appreciate. And, I think when I was a young undergrad, long time ago, ecology was a fairly young discipline in those days, but I remember them talking about the importance of diversity. Diversity matters. And, it made sense for the reasons they were saying, but I can say after 50 years of working in all this stuff, it makes even more sense to me. It wasn't one of those things that you say, well, yeah, that was a good idea at the time. I've just come to see, and I don't think I was, maybe I was biased so much in that direction. Oh, I'm going to go study diversity. It just kind of happened over time as we were doing this. And it's kind of dawning on you that, oh man, maybe I was missing the boat on this one and that one and the other one and so forth. So, but some of Pablo's work too, I'm going to be visiting with him. I've been reviewing theses from his work and they've been publishing papers. I'll see if I can have him send me PDFs of those papers, and we can just create a little group of papers that people can have at their access then that have been published and go through them. And we're hitting the highlights of it all for sure, but for people who want more details and, what were the plants? One of those slides I showed had several of those plants on it, the chicory and the rye and different things like that. But yeah, so I'll get that.
Cool.
Get all that to you.
So several of you're hitting on several points that I just wanted to dive into a little bit more. One was, are there tipping points in that plant diversity level, over which there's a significant increase with livestock health, performance, that kind of thing? And then how do we bring in more? What are those diverse species that are particularly useful that we should be bringing in, recognizing we are in different locales, but
Yeah, another great question. There probably are tipping points. And, there's a lady, Amy Hamilton in Missouri. I've been teaching what they call a master class in Australia, and she's been sitting in on that. And she was making a point from a plant ecologist, Tillman was his name, about how when you look at the overall productivity of systems, and he did a lot of work on this, as you go from monoculture to more diversity, you vastly increase productivity of those landscapes. And then when you start to think now of the emphasis on soils and the importance of soil, and the importance of plants in that. And then you think all the interest in the microbiome and the microbial composition of landscapes. It's clear, just like it is in the rumen, the more diverse the diet is, the more diverse populations of microbes you can maintain, whether it's in the rumen of a cow or a human. People like to study the indigenous people, some of the Hadzas in Africa, and they say, boy, their microbiome is so diverse. Well, it's because they eat this tremendous array of different foods. Same thing we can think in terms of diversity. diversity of plants and what that does then for life below ground and the ability to maintain really diverse populations of microbial, fungal and microbial species, because you create habitat like that one slide said, you're really creating habitat for all these species. And then to me, some of the work that's just showing that in terms of fixing carbon, that mineral associated organic matter, that's really recalcitrant, those microbial populations are really important in all of that, right? So if you build these huge populations through diversity, it becomes, I think, win, win, win at every scale, from the creatures below ground and the soil to the plants. And they're, as I was coming along, there was so much emphasis on competition, right? Dog eat dog world, everything's competing, but we're coming to appreciate in wonderful ways. It's about cooperation, and there's a lot of cooperation. I think it was kind of our system that drove our thinking on that, right? I mean, we're kind of the capitalist, and I'm not saying good or bad on that, but this competition that influenced our thinking a lot, I think, rather than again, I'm reading some things and watching some video on indigenous peoples and this idea of sharing and things that Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about, the service berry. I don't know if you've read that essay. I'll share that with, but it's
please do.
Yeah, that was
It's actually one of the next questions was, could you recommend some resources,
I'll
to learn more about this
essay. She wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, the book Braiding Sweetgrass, which is wonderful. But the essay captures that, and it compares it sort of ecological economics. And I'll share a long paper that was written about fossil fuels and ecological economics that was published in that journal. It's really interesting. Those two papers, to me, really complement one another. And she's talking about the bounty of nature and giving and sharing economies, reciprocity, the giver and giving and sharing, as opposed to the economies based on competition and scarcity and greed and so forth. And there's a lot to think about in all of that. And from what I understand, a lot of the indigenous ways were built much more on this reciprocity and sharing and cooperation, and our system went more in that other direction. And so I've thought about that a lot over the years. It really influenced probably our whole views in ecology of this dog eat dog world. Everything is competing, and you set up studies to look at competition. And now I think a lot is moving toward appreciating. Funny how all that works, huh? And I think we don't. And I say it for me too. Whatever I'm talking about, you don't really realize. But it is interesting to reflect over time. Imagine if we lived to be 1,000 years old. Can you imagine what we'd have seen and think? And we'd think, man, oh man. And I often like to reflect, when, and I realize there's been more than one green revolution, but the green revolution back in the 50s and so forth, that took us down more the fossil fuel path. We can look back now and see some of the negatives that we all talk about. But at the time, they didn't think, we want to set out and kill everything and poison it with pesticides and herbicides. And so they were thinking, how are we going to feed this huge population that's coming, right? So to give them credit. And then the world changes. There's downstream influences. And so I often say, all that we're doing now, and people in 50 years, if we're still on the planet, will probably look back to what the heck were they thinking, But what I think is the world's forever changing, moving and changing and evolving. And what was appropriate 50 years ago isn't appropriate now. What's appropriate now isn't going to be. You have to keep. And so there's no judgment or condemnation. It's just, to stay in the game, you have to keep. And the pace that we've changed everything at, so now we're all having to think about all of that, right? And moving, and there is no critique then in that sense. It's just, we have to keep innovating and adapting. And I was just reading an article yesterday about electric cars and batteries, and these guys in Michigan have innovated this battery that'll take you nearly 800 miles on a charge. And you think, that's the spirit of it, how you have to stay in the game. You have to keep innovating, huh? Challenges, opportunities, keeping an evolutionary spirit. And that's the fun of the whole thing, huh? Of the whole deal, rather than looking in a negative standpoint. And participate in the game the best you can out of the best intent. And then, don't worry about the past or the future, huh?
Just keep evolving. That's it.
Yeah,
keep trying to evolve.
As an individual in your own ways of being in the world, huh? And trying to keep the mind open, which can be really hard. Older you get, I think more set in your ways you get. But trying to just keep open in that sense, huh?
Those are words to live by, I have to say. So, and I recognize we've kind of come to the end of our hour. So I don't know if we should be turning it back. I could just have a chat with you forever.
It's fun for me, obviously, huh? It gives a chance just for an old person just to kind of ramble on about things. But I love the questions. I think they're so interesting and worthwhile, and that is the conversation nowadays in this sense that we're talking, huh? Those are really interesting and worthwhile things. And like I said, I'm happy to share papers. I'll pull together and I'll get Pablo and I are probably going to talk next week. So I'll send you and Megan papers that I have now, and then I'll update those with other ones when Pablo and I talk, because it's just so neat the work to see work that these folks are doing now, younger folks are doing, and where they're going. It's neat to see.
That's fantastic. And there were several questions we didn't get to, Fred, that we might, ask you if you'd take a look at and give an answer to, if you don't mind. There are a little bit more technical questions, although Megan did leave us with one question, which was, if I have a craving for potato chips, does that mean I'm broken?
Yeah, well, see, that's where it gets really complex too.
It does.
If your mother's on a junk food diet when you're in the womb, she's already set you up for some big challenges, huh? That whole rearing environment. So that's where it gets quite complicated, I think. But I visit with people, and in this workshop doing in Australia, there's a lady, Stacy Kiriko, who's that's her area. She works with people, and that gives great opportunity to try to help people to get the body can readjust. But boy, I'm thankful back in the day when I was in the womb and that stuff, there weren't those challenges, huh? Because then there before the grace of God go you and I, huh? I mean, it's hard. I think it can be way hard to try to get out from under some of those habits. But I see people in my own life who have done that, but it's something too. Some of them seems like they fight their whole life. Those cravings never go away. They look at a potato chip, it's like they can or whatever kind of ultra processed thing it is, they can hardly. Yeah, that's where you just can't be exposed, like an alcoholic in a sense. You can't be exposed to it anymore, right? Because it's too much of a too hard to resist that stuff. Oh, you can forget free will at that point. You're captive.
So true. Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you for closing our conference. Thank you for just being here and for the tremendous body of work. And thank you in advance for sharing all of these publications, because I'm sure that there's a ton of us who are just going to dive right into a bunch of them. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, Jen, thank you too for entering into this conversation and the questions and guiding the conversation, and then Megan, to you for all the work you've done too as part of this whole conference. I've been just amazed at all seeing the emails and all that's going on. So thanks to you gals. It's wonderful. How wonderful. Oh, everything's a stolen moment, I think, for me. Just what, yeah. So so much. Yeah, so
Yeah.
wonderful to engage in these kind of things.
Thank you very much, Fred, for joining us and for, like Jen said, for closing out our conference. There's so much to think about, and there are so many other questions and so much that we didn't get into. Now I'm like, oh, we have to have like Fred session number 2. So because I think, yeah, there's a lot of rabbit holes that we went down on our opening conversation that we didn't even get to go down yet on this one. So yeah, I really appreciate the time that you spent with us, and reiterate what Jen said about viewing the rest of, or the videos that Fred did for the farm animal concerns fact, and the link is there because you get 3 hours of this. There's a lot of breadth and depth that's in those videos. So I just wanted to close out the conference. Thanks everybody for joining us for this long. I want to remind folks that at 7:00 tonight, we're going to do a virtual meetup for people to just give their feedback about how the conference went. So that you can navigate through on Whova. That'll be on Whova for the virtual meetups. So if you want to share, I'll also be sending out surveys. I've been sending out surveys just about the singular sessions for you to give feedback on that. But then on Sunday, I'll send you a survey that's like more of our full general information that we want about the conference as a whole piece. And then also some of your demographics that we've been collecting for years. And it's really important for us to be able to keep collecting that. So it's important for us, for you to respond to those surveys. They help us really make our case to many of our funders. So that's important. And I'll be sending that out tomorrow. And also we'll be posting the recordings of all of these workshops or seminars. We'll be doing those. I'll try to get them up before February. So we'll have it on our YouTube channel. So if you missed anything, I'll send everybody a message when we get those up and running. And I'll be loading them up, one by one, because that's how my internet works. And so really, yeah. And if anyone has a real need to see something, I can also figure out how to give you access even before I get them all up there. So if you've got a burning need, email me and I'll get you a link into a session. And at the end, I just want to thank everybody that helped make this happen. We couldn't have done it without this great team. So thank you to Colleen Reed and Andrew May and Cheryl Herrick and Kelsey Meehan and Amber Reed and the VGFA board members who stepped in and hosted. Thank you to Carol and to Matt and to Bruce and to Jen and to Sarah. And last, but certainly not least, all of the speakers and presenters that gave their time to be here. It was great. Great to, it's wonderful to see you all in person, but there's so much flexibility that we can have doing it over video, and the distance being able to be in Fred's living room. I mean, or your office there. It's pretty great. So thank you all. It was a pleasure.